Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu filling in for Riz Khan. The Mossad is Israel's secret intelligence gathering organization. It has a phenomenal reputation for being one of the most effective spy agencies in the world. Its accomplishments are the stuff of legend. But it's also had its fair share of failures and botched operations, and it's also notorious for some of the methods and tactics it uses. On today's show, we talk to a former director of Mossad. Joining us now from Tel Aviv is Efraim Halevy. He's the author of Man in the Shadows, a book about his nearly 3 decades inside Israel's spy agency. It's also just been released in Arabic as part of a larger series called Know Thy Enemy. Currently, he heads the Sasha Center for Strategic Studies at Jerusalem's Hebrew University. Mr. Halevy, thanks for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's look at the current situation in the Middle East. We have the United States, which is now trying to push for peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but at the same time we have Hamas militants who are firing rockets into Israel. We have Israel going on the offensive in Gaza, and we also have a situation where a Palestinian gunman recently shot dead students in Jerusalem at a seminary, and now ultra-nationalist Israelis calling for some kind of retribution against that gunman's family. It doesn't look like a rosy picture for peace, does it?
It's not a very rosy picture for peace, but I'd like to make one small correction what you said. I don't think Israel went on the offensive in Gaza. I think that Israel retaliated in Gaza after having been attacked for several years from Gaza by rockets and missiles which have been fired against Israel daily for several years now.
So where do you think the peace process stands under those circumstances?
What is happening in actual fact is that the negotiations with the Palestinian Authority are continuing between the Israel government and the Palestinian Authority. But more and more it looks as if Hamas in Gaza is not brought into the equation one way or another, then by the end of the year it will be very difficult for either side to reach the stage in which some kind of an agreement will be able to be signed.
Well, I want to talk about the role of Hamas. Now, you are an advocate for talks with Hamas. That has surprised many. This is an organization which has effectively been calling for a one-state solution, really, which could lead to the dissolution of Israel. And that position, talking with Hamas, goes against the current positions of both the Israeli government and the United States, which is one of the main sponsors of the peace process. Why are you advocating talks with Hamas?
I believe that Hamas is a force on the ground. I think we have to deal with realities. I recognize the fact that Hamas does not recognize the right of Israel to exist, and that in effect it is calling for the destruction of Israel. But I believe that Israel is indestructible, and therefore I don't believe that there is any chance in the world that Hamas will achieve its ultimate aim. I believe that Hamas is now asking for a ceasefire, and he who asks for a ceasefire is in an inferior position. And I think this is the moment to try and engage them and see whether some kind of arrangement, an interim arrangement, can be found.
But isn't that going to be a very difficult position to sell to the Israeli public and in some respects to the American public?
I think it's very difficult to sell, I agree with you. I'm not seeking for a permanent solution to the problem. I'm talking about an interim solution to the problem. I'm looking for what we call conflict management and not conflict resolution. And I believe that in the area of conflict management, you have to deal with the forces on the ground, as I said a moment ago. And therefore, I believe that the fact that 64% of the Israel public now, according to recent polls, supports this position, tends to prove that this is probably one of the courses that should be seriously considered.
You've also been quoted as saying that you believe that Hamas has credibility and is an effective political force. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that when Israel decided to have a unilateral disengagement from Gaza, Hamas decided unilaterally not to attack Israel whilst the Israel forces were redeploying and leaving the Gaza Strip. And they maintained this position, except for one exception, when there was an event in Beersheba, which got out of control. But effectively, Hamas decided to do something, and it was credible in what it decided to do. I believe that Hamas is not a very pleasant organization to deal with, but I think they're credible. And I believe that in time they might also learn to live with realities. I believe that ultimately Hamas will accept the 1967 borders with adjustments as a fact of life. That is what I believe, and I think that there is some basis to what I'm believing.
You know, you have also been one of those people in Israel. In fact, you formulated the policy of extrajudicial killings, killing leaders of organizations that were against Israel, assassinating leaders there. Do you think that is an effective way of getting peace?
First of all, let me say that I have seen this statement made in a certain interview which was attributed to me. I never made such a statement, and I never was part of this system of policy making. There is a division of labor in Israel in the intelligence community, and as far as facts are concerned, I was not involved in that decision making, although I believe that such decisions were correctly arrived at. So let me correct the record on that. I believe that there comes a moment in time when very, very severe measures have to be taken in order to prevent deterioration in the situation. And I believe that in those cases, such measures were taken.
Well, do you think it's a means, an effective means of finally getting to a peace settlement by assassinating leaders in the opposition?
I don't think that this is a means of getting a peace, but I don't think that there is any way of getting peace by murdering innocent school children in a rabbinical seminary. And unfortunately, in the Middle East, there are rules of the game which we have not formulated, but others have formulated. And in certain circumstances, just ignoring those rules doesn't achieve a desirable end.
So from what you're saying, I gather that those killings were carried out, those orders were given to deter people from carrying out attacks on Jewish people, on Israelis. Has that policy worked in your view?
No, it is not a policy which has been formulated to deter people. It was a policy which was formulated at the time in order to prevent further killings, and I believe that in certain cases killings were averted as a result of this. But I don't think that this is a major element of policy, and I believe, as I've said just a moment ago, that what we should pursue is an interim solution in which both sides preserve what is agreed upon, and both sides realize that what is achieved is an interim solution and not a permanent solution of the conflict.
When you look at Israel today and you look at Israeli security, which country, in your belief, poses the greatest threat to Israel's survival?
I believe there is no threat to Israel's survival. I believe that Israel is indestructible, and therefore I don't believe that Israel's survival is at stake. If you're asking me which is the country which has one of the most serious threats to Israel, I think that Iran is a very serious threat to Israel, but it is not, as is said often, an existential threat to Israel. Iran is incapable of destroying Israel.
And what can be done about that from an Israeli point of view?
I think the major effort now is to mobilize international pressure upon Iran to some extent, if possible, suspend its enrichment project in order to facilitate a negotiation between the powers that be in the world and Iran. I think this is the most effective policy which now has to be followed. And I'm of the opinion that despite the fact that sanctions which have been slapped on Iran are often said to be ineffective, my impression is that behind the bravado of the Iranians on this, some of these sanctions are very effective.
Would you support a preemptive strike against Iran?
I don't think this is a matter which is now on the agenda as far as I see, and therefore I don't think one has to voice an opinion upon it at this particular point in time.
Okay, Mr. Halevy, we're going to go to an email here, and this email is from Deborah Plummer from Kansas here in the United States. And she writes, what do you suggest to remove America's big military footprint in the Middle East? Will it ever be possible?
I don't want to counsel the United States how to conduct its policies in the Middle East. I believe the United States has legitimate interests in the Middle East, and I don't think that, how should I put it, castigating the United States policy by saying it's a big footprint of one kind or another serves a useful purpose in any way.
Let's look again at the Palestinian situation. Do you believe it is very important and vital for the Palestinians to have their own leadership, to have their own state?
I think it's very important for the Palestinians to have their own state and their own leadership. My problem is that I don't see at the moment that the Palestinians have succeeded to create within their nation a system of government which is viable and credible. Over the years, the Palestinians have not succeeded in creating a system of governance in their own state, and I don't think this can be imported from outside. Either they have it within their capacity or they don't. The way things seem at the moment, the way they appear at the moment, unfortunately, the Palestinians have not yet proven that they are capable of creating a state.
Well, you know, you've been at the center of Israeli intelligence gathering for a very long time. Let me ask you this, as a former leader of Mossad, what do you consider to be Mossad's greatest successes?
I wish I could tell you. I don't think that it would be either responsible on my part or it would be credible even on my part if I listed successes. I think the greatest of Mossad's successes have never been published and never been made public, and I'm happy that this is so.
Well, let me ask you this then. What are Mossad's greatest failures in your view?
I think the same goes for the failures. Some of the failures I think have become public. I don't want to dwell on them. I think that it would be more useful to dwell on the fact that Israel and the Mossad have been extremely successful in forging peace with their neighbors. The peace with Egypt was a peace which was originated on Moroccan soil, and a major figure in that was the head of the Mossad at the time. The Mossad doesn't only deal with the kind of activities you have mentioned a few minutes ago. One of the major missions of the Mossad is to promote a peace between Israel and its neighbors.
If that is one of the major roles that Mossad plays, has Mossad failed by the fact that Israel is still in conflict with the Palestinians?
No, because as I said a moment ago, I believe the real failure here is that the Palestinians have failed to create a credible leadership. They didn't create a system within their nation, within society, which promoted a civil type of government, an educational system, a system of national health, an economic system, a legal system. These are all matters which are vital to creating a real national viable movement. Violence in itself is not a good recipe for promoting national independence. Yes, you can use violence in order to achieve independence, but if at the same time you don't engage in creating the machinery of state, the machinery of governance, the machinery of society, then this is a failure.
Well, I'm going to go back to another email here, and this one's from Jazeera from Kentucky here in the United States. And she writes, looking at Israeli decisions over the decades of your involvement, do you honestly consider the current situation of occupation in Palestine, which is a result of those decisions, a success?
The whole idea of occupation of Palestine, unfortunately, is, I think, misrepresented. Let us just recall that in 1947, the United Nations passed a resolution whereby two states should be created, a Jewish state and an Arab state, a Palestinian Arab state. Israel accepted, or the Jews of Palestine at the time accepted this solution. The Arabs of the Palestine and the Arab world rejected it. And when in the end there was a war of independence, the areas that Israel remained in became its provisional borders, and on the other side there was not a Palestinian state. The Gaza Strip was in the hand of the Egyptians, the West Bank was in the hand of the Jordanians. There was no Palestinian independence until Israel overtook the territories in 1967. Israel overtook the territories from the Egyptians and from the Jordanians, not from the Palestinians. As far as the Palestinians are concerned, they never had any independence whatsoever of any kind until 1992-93, when Israel initiated the negotiation with the Palestinians, and Israel willingly ceded territory to the Palestinians in order to create the Palestinian Authority. That is the way history unfolded itself over those years.
But there is an occupation of Palestinian territory right now in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, isn't there?
When you say there is an occupation, what you're intending to say is that before Israel was there was a Palestinian state. There was a Palestinian free state. This was not the case. As I said, Israel overtook the territory which had been occupied by the Jordanians and by the Egyptians in 1967. Those are the facts of life. And after that, in 1992-93, Israel ceded sections of that territory to the Palestinians to enable them to create the beginnings of their Palestinian Authority. That is the way it was.
So if there is no occupation in your view because there was no state there, what is the peace process about then?
The peace process is about ceding territory which has been under Israeli control since 1967 and enabling the Palestinians to create a Palestinian state. That is what the peace process is all about.
But even your closest ally, the United States, believes that this is occupied territory. They have said so. They've asked for you to even stop expanding settlements in occupied territory.
That is true. The United States has asked us to stop expanding settlements in those areas. They have referred to them as occupied territories. But with all due respect to the United States of America, I believe this is a wrong term to use because, as I explained to you before, Israel took over the territories which had been in the possession of the Jordanians and the Egyptians. There was no Palestinian territory per se in the hand of the Palestinians ever since 1948. And before 1948, it was a British mandate.
Mr. Halevy, I'm going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts about pressing issues around the world, send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. See you next time. Street Talk is next.